We're predicting stats for the Arizona State Sun Devils quarterbacks this week, starting with Trenton Bourguet. Let's hop into it on this edition of the Locked On Sun Devils podcast.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. Shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. And if you have not already, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications wherever you're getting your podcast. And stay in touch with the show by following me on Twitter at RichieBrads36 and the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. Now, on today's edition of the podcast, and for the next 2 days, we are going to be predicting the statistics for Trenton Bourguet, Drew Pyne, and Jaden Rashada. Now, very, very important note here. I am predicting these stats as if they are the full-time starters for the Sun Devils. This is not predicting the stats if they play 4 games or half the season or whatever it is. This is if they are the full-time starters. They are not benched. They are not injured. They are not anything else that could possibly hinder them playing an entire season. This is a best case, a worst case, and a prediction, like we have been doing for everyone else. But this is if they are full-time starters, similar to the receivers, similar to everybody else that we have talked about. This is indicative of their best case and worst case scenarios. This is not indicative of everybody culminating together. I'm not saying the Sun Devils are going to throw for 9,000 yards and 50 touchdowns. That's not what we're doing here. This is if Trenton Bourguet was a full-time starter for the team. So that's where we'll start. Let's go ahead and hop into this for Trenton Bourguet. So taking a look at passing yards first. This is going to be an offense that is not going to be short on weapons. You've got Elijhah Badger and Jalin Conyers, who are anticipated to be having breakout seasons in their junior years, right? They both looked outstanding last year, especially when Trenton Bourguet took over. And I anticipate that they're going to continue playing very good football with him under center. You've also got some other interesting guys. You've got Jordan Tyson and Xavier Guillory that are transferring. You've got Giovanni Sanders, who's returning. You've got Cameron Scadaboo out of the backfield who can catch the football. You've got the other tight ends like Bryce Pierre and Messiah Swinson. You've got plenty of other options in the passing game as well. Andre Johnson, some of the freshmen that are coming in as well. There's no shortage of guys to throw the ball to. With that in mind, as much as I want to say he's going to throw for 4,000 yards, he's just not. That's over 300 passing yards a game. And this is not an offense that's going to do that. This isn't like indicative of Trenton Bourguet. I'm also taking into account what's going on with the offense. So my best case scenario, I almost was at 3,500 yards. But again, that's almost 300 passing yards a game. And I just don't think they're going to do that, at least not consistently. So we're going with 3,200 passing yards in a best case scenario. This is still a really, really good season for the Sun Devils. And keep in mind, last year as a team, they threw for just over 3,000 yards. So this would be if basically like a little better than what it was last year, but you would be having Trenton Bourguet as the full-time starter instead of splitting it between 2 different quarterbacks. Because last year, Bourguet was doing a really good job averaging over 200 passing yards a game. And this is with coming in late versus Washington and then missing some time against Washington State. Like, if he was able to play that full time, I feel like he could have led the team in passing yards. He had barely missed it to Emory Jones by a whopping 43 yards. And if he's the full-time starter, I feel like this offense is probably going to be more high-flying through the air if Bourguet is under center. And I think that Bourguet is probably the best case scenario for the passing attack. So 3,200, I feel like, is probably the best case. Again, I wanted to go 3,500. Curious where that'll end up lying. Curious what you guys think as well. In a worst case scenario, I'm going with 2,000 yards. Bourguet threw for 1,490 last year. I don't have any reason to believe that he's going to regress significantly from what he did last year, but there's always that chance that Bourguet just doesn't progress and he's not able to get his weapons going, because I think that Badger and Conyers are as close to quarterback proof as it's going to get for the team this year. So worst case scenario, I'm going 2,000 yards. This is even if Badgers and Conyers are really good, he's not able to get anybody else involved. But like that would also be a situation where like Badgers only got like 600 receiving yards probably, and I just don't see that happening. But again, in a worst case scenario where Bourguet is just not good this year, even in 12 games, I think 2000 is probably about where it lies. Final prediction, I'm going closer to my best case scenario. I have written here 2700. And I think he's going to be closer to 3,000 than he is going to be 2,000, which is why I went with 2,700. But this is also a quarterback that I wouldn't be surprised if he crossed 3,000 in a 12-game season. I think he could very easily do that. So 2,700 may be my prediction, but I also think that this is a quarterback that's going to be much, much, much closer to 3,000 passing yards than he will be to 2,000 passing yards. Even if Bourguet is bad, like there's just too many weapons here for him not to use them and get the most out of them, no matter how good or bad he is. Badger's going to make acrobatic catches, and he's going to get 50-50 balls, and he's going to be able to separate and get open. That's just going to happen because he is that caliber receiver. Jalin Conyers, you talk about 50-50 balls, they're probably closer to 60-40 balls. Like, he's just so much bigger, stronger than the linebackers and safeties he's going to be going up against. And it's going to be very difficult for him to not pull in those catches unless he just doesn't progress. But if they both do what they're supposed to do, that's really good offense between the two of those guys. I think I predicted that they could be about 1,700 yards between the two of them. I don't have their predictions in front of me, but they're going to do their damage. If you can get anything out of the other guys on the offense, Guillory, Tyson, Scadaboo, whatever have you, if he's able to get the most out of them, he should be able to be 3,000 or more yards. I'm going to be a little more conservative here and stick with 2,700 yards, but that's kind of my overall prediction here for the passing yards. All right, guys, I have to talk to you about our good friends over at Bird Dogs because I absolutely love this product and I use them so much whenever I am going to work at my day job, or I'm going out on a date and I want to be comfortable, or I'm hanging out with the boys. I always wear my Bird Dogs in public. These things are the best. They make you look good. They got that stretch khaki short that are designed to fit slim through the thigh and the leg and give you a truly sculpted look. Guys, I don't work out consistently. I don't have the best legs in the world, but I still feel like my Bird Dogs make my legs look good. They do the same thing as that Lululemon that I know so many of you love, but they fit better. And the way they fit better than regular shorts too, that are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Well, Bird Dogs fixed that issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks like the khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And the best part, guys, especially for everyone living in Arizona, they have an anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. And when you're sweating, like I know you are, that's what you want to see. So do me a favor. Go to birddogs.com birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, or enter the promo code lockedoncollege for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or promo code lockedoncollege for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning into the Locked On Sun Devils podcast. Wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and tune in tomorrow as we break down transfer Drew Pyne stats and why he might be the next big thing for a Kenny Dillingham transfer quarterback. That's what he is. Tune in tomorrow. All right. We're going to go through touchdowns and interceptions right here. And we're going to go best case for both of them. So, in a terrific season for Trenton Bourguet, I am thinking 25 touchdown passes against 5 interceptions. That's a ridiculous 5-to-1 ratio. Now, last year he was 11 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, so just shy of 2-to-1. So this would be a pretty insane kind of season for him. Now, also keep in mind, you could combine the best case for touchdowns with the worst case for interceptions. So you can separate these. This is simply like a best case scenario for both. Like 25 touchdowns against 5 interceptions. That's the best case scenario. We'll get into my worst case and my predictions as well, but bottom line is you can mix and match these ones, right? The best case for the touchdowns, though, this is where everything comes together. Elijhah Badger and Jalin Conyers become superstars and they get into the end zone a lot. But you also have guys that are able to contribute big time. Maybe Jordan Tyson gets 4 touchdowns on long balls. Maybe Xavier Guillory is a true number 2 receiver and gets 6 or 7 touchdowns, with Badger getting his close to double digit and Jalin Conyers getting his close to double digit. If everybody's able to, combine their efforts together, this wouldn't be a surprise if the Sun Devils were closer to that 25 touchdown range. Now, keep in mind, they haven't done this in a minute. Like, this is not something that Sun Devil fans are accustomed to. In the first year of the Jaden Daniels era, he had 17 touchdowns as a freshman. Second year, he had 5 touchdowns. And then his third year, he had 10 touchdowns. Last year, the team combined for 18 touchdowns. So this is not normal for the Sun Devils to be throwing this many touchdowns. They do a lot more damage on the ground than they do through the air. So 25 touchdowns is a pretty crazy season for any quarterback to have. It would be one of the best seasons since Mike Bercovici was starting under center. So 25 doesn't seem like a lot, right? But I promise you it is. That's over 2 touchdown passes a game, guys. And again, with the weapons that are here, it makes sense why you would be able to get that kind of production out of them. Now, with that being said, the lowest and worst case scenario, I think it's 15. You could go with 10 because that's what Jaden Daniels did in his junior year. But again, Bourguet threw 11 last year. I don't think he's throwing 10, especially with the weapons they have. I think Jalin Conyers can get 10 by himself. So I don't think that Bourguet is going to throw less than 15 if he is a 12-game starter. He feels like a quarterback that is going to be able to get the most out of his guys. 15 feels like a worst-case scenario for touchdowns. At the same time, the interceptions feels like 15 is also a worst-case scenario. That would be a 1-to-1 average. This is not what I think is going to happen. But again, you can kind of mix and match these. If like Arizona State's a high-flying offense, you can have 25 touchdowns against 15 interceptions. You can have 15 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. This is a mix and match, if you will. But my overall prediction for the team, now these ones are kind of set in stone. Like you can mix and match them, but my final prediction, I'm going to say Bourguet throws 22 touchdowns, so he doubles what he did last year against 10 interceptions. So a little over a 2-to-1 ratio. This is an offense that's got weapons and potential superstars. You would have to be so terribly bad to not be able to get the most out of these guys. And even then, like I said, they're about as close to quarterback proof as you're going to get. So 22 touchdowns, it is a lot closer to 25 than it is 15. But this is a quarterback that I feel is one of the best throwers of the football that they've had in a handful of years. I think Bourguet is a very, very quality passer. He showed that off last year. I feel like he's going to continue building on what he did a year ago and have, again, one of the finer seasons that a Sun Devils quarterback has had in a minute. 22 touchdowns there, 10 interceptions. Look, he threw 6 a year ago. He was pretty careful with the football, though. He wasn't turning the ball over at an alarming rate. He was a lot safer with the ball than I think anybody like truly realizes. In fact, he had 2 interceptions against Arizona. Like, other than that, he was an interception per game in the time that he did play. I understand that, but he still is a careful quarterback. He's not an overly risky guy, and he definitely is more touchdowns than he is interceptions. He's going to continue to do that. I have nothing but faith that he's going to be careful with the football compared to maybe what the Sun Devils have seen in the past. Feel like he's definitely going to be on the higher end of the touchdowns and the lower end on the interceptions. Again, prediction here, 22 touchdowns against just 10 interceptions is my prediction. Guys, make sure that you tune in for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, we're taking a look at Drew Pyne and predicting his stats and why he might be the next great transfer for the Kenny Dillingham offense. You won't want to miss it as we predict these guys for 12 games. All right, we're going to talk some rushing stats, yards and touchdowns, and then my final thoughts. Best case scenario, 300 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns. This is him at like his absolute best. If you take a look at this kind of season for Bourguet, this is a all Pac-12 honorable mention kind of year. Like, he won't be a first team or second team because you've got Michael Penix and Caleb Williams and you've got Cameron Rising and stuff like that. But this is the kind of season that gets you votes for sure. You've got a lot of potential here for him as a runner, though. Last year, 24 carries, 10 yards. I get it. It looks terrible. But he was also sacked 7 times for 72 yards. Like, it's one of those things where college football is just the worst for combining sack yards and rushing yards. I'm not a fan of it. I prefer what the NFL does with the net yards kind of thing where it doesn't impact anything specific. But you take those away, he's at 17 carries for 82 rushing yards. It's a very healthy average, over 4 yards per carry. I think he could possibly get into the end zone this year as a runner. 300 yards would be kind of on a very, very high end here. This would be if Bourguet was like a borderline dual threat for the team. This would be a really interesting kind of season for him. If he was not only throwing the football very well, but he was able to get some stuff going on the ground game. Now, I'm not going to go super high end. This isn't a 500-yard runner. This isn't a 700-yard runner or anything like that. We saw that in a season where Jaden Daniels became like this absolutely monster threat with his legs. And even last year, Emory Jones was at just 31 rushing yards. Now, granted, he did lose 141 yards on sacks, but he was not as dynamic a runner as we thought he was going to be. So if Bourguet rushes for 300 yards, that's an insane season. 5 touchdowns on the ground, also insane. Now, worst case scenario, sorry, nice and boring. 0 yards, 0 touchdowns. Just not able to do anything, kind of like last year where he had 10 rushing yards. Like, this would be where he just does not get anything going on the ground game. Maybe he has some carries, right? But he could also take a bunch of sacks. He could have negative yards. We see that all the time in college football, those guys who have negative rushing yards because they get sacked so many times. And this is going to be an offensive line that is going to be interesting to watch. It could be rock solid or it could be terrible. Like, we'll wait and see how it impacts him. My prediction, I'm going with 150 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns because I do think that over the stretch of a 12-game season, based off of what he was doing last year, as long as the sack numbers are able to go down, I think Bourguet is still going to be able to do some damage with his legs. He is a lot more of a multi. I don't want to call him a dual threat, but he is a mobile quarterback. He can get out of the pocket. He can take off when he wants to take off. I think that Bourguet is not to be that guy, but he is sneaky athletic, and he's a much better runner than people realize. And I think that that's going to translate much more this year than it did last year. especially if the offensive line is able to step up. 2 touchdowns. Look, I think that the quarterbacks are going to be able to get into the end zone. Emory Jones had 4 touchdowns in half the season last year. Bourguet should be able to do that as well. So, best case, worst case, and my predictions. Best case scenario, he's going to pass for 3,200 yards and rush for 300 yards. He's going to pass for 25 touchdowns and run for 5, combining for 30 total touchdowns and just 5 interceptions in the absolute best case scenario. In an absolute worst case scenario, he's only going to throw for 2,000 yards. He's going to throw 15 interceptions with just 15 touchdowns, and he's not going to do anything on the ground. My final prediction, Trenton Bourguet passes for 2,700 yards, 22 touchdowns against 10 interceptions with 150 more yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. Here's what I want to discuss before we wrap up this edition of the show. I mentioned Mike Bercovici earlier, and I want to talk about him more because looking at Bercovici, it's interesting to compare their situations. Bercovici, as a junior, came in for relief of Taylor Kelly when he got injured, and he was really good. He threw 12 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. He threw for nearly 1,500 yards. Very, very good. In relief, we built up that hype going into his final season. He goes out and throws almost 4,000 yards with a bunch of receivers who we didn't know too much about. Devin Lucien had transferred from UCLA. He was a 1,000-yard guy. Tim White was a very quality receiver for the team, but he was more of a special teams guy previously. DJ Foster translates to receiver full-time. Like, he was able to get a lot out of guys that we didn't know much about. And he threw, again, almost 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. Jake Plummer had a magical senior season, and he led Arizona State to a Rose Bowl. I'm not saying that this is a Rose Bowl team at all. I'm not saying this is an 8-win team. Bercovici still led them to a 6-7 year that season. Like, they were a competitive football team. Trenton Bourguet could be doing the same thing. Like, it feels like his career is lining up the way that Mike Bercovici's did. Bercovici, prior to 2014, where he came in as a starter in relief for Taylor Kelly, had just 7 career passing attempts. Trenton Bourguet had 10 prior to him coming in relief for Emory Jones. I'm curious to see if this could be history repeating itself. And it's going to be a much better offense than it was when Bercovici did what he did. He's got established stars. He's got a offensive-minded coach. He looks the part. And I think that he could be in for a very, very good season in his senior year. I'm hoping it's one to remember, and I'm hoping it's a season that we look fondly back on and be like, man, you remember when Trenton Bourguet broke out as a senior? And we talk about him as one of the best quarterbacks of the team for the 2020s. We talk about him as one of the most underappreciated quarterbacks in the history of Arizona State. That's what I'm hoping for. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Predict his stats if you want to predict his stats. Is he going to be a breakout senior quarterback? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. So hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and make sure you follow me on Twitter so we can interact. You can hit me up at Richie Brads36 and the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. But guys, that's all that I have for you on this edition of the podcast. Thank you guys again, as always, for tuning in. Remember to follow along, and tomorrow we'll be taking a look at Drew Pyne for the potential starting quarterback for the Sun Devils. Until then, you keep it locked right here on the Locked On